Hello, and welcome to Cabinet Conversations. My name is Paul Tatro, and I'm the director of Ford's Theater. If you're joining us for the first time, this is our live series exploring creativity, history, and leadership. You can learn more and explore our past programs by visiting our website, www.fords.org. On this day in 1861 and 1865, Abraham Lincoln took the oath of office as President of the United States. At his first inauguration, Lincoln faced the challenge of a country already splitting apart, with many different opinions about how to resolve the crisis. At his second inauguration, he faced the question of how to reunite the country as the Civil War was coming to an end. During his presidency, Lincoln navigated the country's most existential crisis, and in the process, laid the groundwork for expanded freedoms. His leadership was not without its faults. Lincoln dramatically expanded executive power, suspended the writ of habeas corpus, and certainly had his own prejudices, blind spots, and biases. Yet for all of that today, we consider Lincoln one of the most important presidents ever. Leaders of all stripes look to Lincoln for inspiration. At Ford's, we commemorate his life by exploring his legacy of leadership. Today, we welcome three men who have led in different realms: business, politics, and the armed forces. David Rubenstein is a co-founder and co-chairman of the Carlyle Group, one of the world's largest and most successful private investment firms. Mr. Rubenstein is a significant donor to nonprofit organizations and historic sites, including providing transformative gifts for the restoration of the Washington Monument, Monticello, Mount Vernon, and the Smithsonian Institution, among many others. Rubenstein is also chairman of the boards of trustees of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts and the Council on Foreign Relations, a fellow of the Harvard Corporation, a director of the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a trustee of the Institute for Advanced Study, the National Constitution Center, and the World Economic Forum. David is also a friend and supporter of Ford's Theater. His most recent book, How to Lead: Wisdom from the World's Greatest CEOs, Founders, and Game Changers, was published by Simon & Schuster in September 2020. The Honorable James Mattis served more than 40 years in the United States Marine Corps as an infantry officer, plus duty in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, as NATO Supreme Allied Commander, and as commander of the U.S. Central Command, comprised of 250,000 U.S. and Allied troops in combat across the Middle East and South Asia. A four-star general, General Mattis retired in 2013 and worked as a Davies Family Scholar at Stanford University's Hoover Institute. Subsequently, he served as the United States Secretary of Defense from January 2017 through December of 2018. The Honorable Rex Tillerson served as Secretary of State from February 2017 to March 2018. At the end of 2016, he concluded a career of more than 41 years in the petroleum industry, beginning as a production engineer at ExxonMobil and holding a series of increasingly senior assignments until his retirement as chairman and chief executive officer. Former Secretary Tillerson has a long-standing involvement with the Boy Scouts of America, in his own youth earning its highest rank of Eagle Scout, and as an adult serving as the national president of the organization from 2010 to 2012. As a former director with the United Negro College Fund, Tillerson championed the importance of youth education, mentoring, and community engagement. Additionally, he served as vice chairman of the Ford's Theater Society, working to restore and expand Ford's Theater campus and museum in 2009, Abraham Lincoln's bicentennial year. Welcome to our distinguished panel. As a reminder to all our viewers, we are taking your questions on our social media platforms. Please feel free to submit those so that we may share your questions with our guests during the program. And now, Mr. Rubenstein, it's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for your continuous, very outstanding service to Ford's Theater. You've been an outstanding director for quite some time, and I appreciate what you've done. And I want to thank General Mattis and Secretary Tillerson for joining us. I know both of you are very busy, but you were both willing to agree to do this because of your, I think, love of Abraham Lincoln, your appreciation for Ford's Theater. So thank you for doing this. Let me start with Rex, if I could. Rex, you serve as a board member of Ford's Theater, and in that capacity, you chaired the Capitol campaign. I think that's one of the first times that we had our own relationship beginning, and you were very successful in raising the money for that while you were running Exxon. Did you find it to be harder to raise money for Ford's Theater than you thought, or people said, Ford's Theater, of course I'll give you some money? What was it like?
Well, David, it was a fabulous opportunity, and I was really pleased to do that. And I think originally the campaign had a goal of about $50 million, and we had little difficulty achieving that. And at that time, then the board said, well, could you raise 60? And we raised that. And then they said, well, how about 70? They kept moving the goalpost on me. And at that point, I said, we're going to declare the campaign done. And we did achieve that number. And quite frankly, the support during the campaign was very broad and widespread, both within the country, from so many individual philanthropists and family trust, who shared our great interest in not just preserving, but actually expanding upon people's understanding of Lincoln, why Lincoln matters to us and our American heritage. But we also received considerable support from foreign entities and foreign governments who, I think, interestingly enough, they recognize the important role that Abraham Lincoln plays in our American history and our culture and our heritage. And they too take lessons away from Lincoln's tenure as a leader in this country, and were very willing and stepped up to support in significant ways that campaign. So it was quite a gratifying opportunity for me to see the level of support that Ford's Theater was able to garner.
Okay, Jim, if I could ask you, it is said that Abraham Lincoln got a lot of solace when he was reading the classics or reading Shakespeare. And I've read that you got the same kind of satisfaction while you were in combat, taking your books with you, and you would read them. Did you get some kind of satisfaction out of reading the classics while you're in combat? And did your colleagues say, Jim, be careful, this is dangerous here. You should be not reading classics and carrying all your books with you?
It's good to see you again, David, and delightful to be back with Secretary Tillerson. I really read those books with the idea of gaining wisdom. Every leader throughout the ages has to deal with polarities, has to reconcile polarities. And it was heartening to read these books and realize I wasn't the first guy to have to deal with problems. Don't get any big guy-itis. Just settle down, figure out the facts, and do the best you can. But no, I didn't get any heat from my fellow Marines for reading it, David. They, believe it or not, at each rank, when you get promoted, the Marines have a required reading list. And when you make sergeant, you get a new list of books you have to read. When you make captain, you get a new list. You make colonel, and even when you make general, here comes another 25 books you have to read. So no, they understood this was the price of learning how to learn things in life without having to experience them yourself. So no problem. It was all part of the game.
Let me ask you both a question about your background a moment for people who may not be familiar with it. And I think most people probably are, but there may be some who are not. Rex, did you grow up saying, I want to get into the oil business, the energy business, and someday I want to be Secretary of State? Or what were your plans when you were growing up? Why did you ultimately go into Exxon and ultimately agree to become Secretary of State?
Well, I had no vision that far out in terms of those aspirations. I majored in engineering at the university because I had a love of science and math, and quite frankly, thought I would probably take my engineering degree. I majored in civil engineering and work in probably either construction design, or the steel industry. That is where I had spent my summers gaining experience. But a couple of recruiters from Exxon Company USA at the time really put a sales job on me, and they just wouldn't take no for an answer. And so I ended up entering the oil business with really little knowledge of what I was getting myself into. In fact, I kept asking them, what's a civil engineer going to do in an oil company? And they said, don't worry about it. Just come to work. You'll figure it out. And so I did. And I told myself, well, in a year, I'm going to do a little self-examination. And if it's not working out, I'm pretty sure I could switch at that point. I had many job offers when I graduated, and I could change. But I fell in love with it, and they were right. I had wonderful opportunities to learn. And I think that was the important element, is to always be in a mental state of constant learning, understanding that you're never going to figure it all out, but just absorb as much as you can. But I fell in love with the industry. Obviously, I thrived at it, had a lot of different jobs along the way. And as I approached retirement from ExxonMobil, I was really thinking about what was I going to do next, and in terms of both family and in terms of philanthropic things I'm interested in. And the call to serve as Secretary of State came really like a lightning bolt out of the blue. It was the last thing I expected. But I felt very strongly about my obligations to serve the country, and that I could help President Trump. It's what he asked for. He asked for my help, and that I felt a real keen sense of obligation to step up and do that. And so it was really with little hesitation, was with a lot of thought and a lot of counsel from many people, that I accepted his appointment. And I'm glad I did. I cherish every day that I served, had that opportunity to serve the country. It was extremely important to me to get to do that.
Okay. Jim, did you tell your parents, I'm going to spend the rest of my professional career in the Marines, when you were young? And what did they say? Or did you not expect to spend 40 years in the Marines?
No, David, we all have our plans or ideas. At age 18, it was the Vietnam War was on, so the draft was coming. But I joined the Marines with the idea I'd do my 2 or 3 years, come home and teach physics and history and coach football at the local high school. I had my whole life planned, and we all know what God does when you have a plan like that. He gets a good laugh. And I got into the Marines, and frankly, the only reason I stuck around that low-paying outfit so long was I fell in love with the sailors and Marines. I learned to hate some of the jobs, like I learned to hate minefields by age 21. Never fell in love with those, but I love being around the kind of lads who would willingly crawl into a minefield looking for something they didn't want to find so their buddy didn't get hurt. So I stuck around for those years. It was an honor. I had been raised by the greatest generation. I still think that we were probably the luckiest generation because of that, but service to the country is both duty and a privilege. And if you're ready to do it, then you do it. And like Secretary Tillerson, I didn't make any plans to be the Secretary of Defense. I'd been the Executive Secretary for 2 of them, and knew it was a rather difficult job. And when the call came, again, whether it's a Republican or Democrat, when the president calls, and the way I was brought up, as long as you're prepared to do the job, you say yes. And it was an absolute honor to serve alongside Secretary Tillerson every day that I was in there alongside him.
Well, let me ask you about that. Generally, secretaries of state and secretaries of defense, they don't get along so well historically. I've lived in Washington 40 years, and most of the time they're backstabbing each other. There are some exceptions, of course, but there wasn't any report of that between the two of you. How did you manage to get along so well when you have these big bureaucracies that are often sparring with each other? Rex, why don't you start with that?
Well, it's a great question, David. Jim Mattis and I did not know each other prior to our being asked to serve under President Trump. And I think it may have been, Jim, the day you were confirmed, we got in touch with each other and arranged to have dinner at the Jefferson Hotel where I was living at the time. And that was our first meeting. And I think we spent somewhere between 3 and 4 hours together that night, exchanging our views on the challenges, national security challenges, foreign policy challenges that our incoming president was going to face. And we shared our views on I think, principles and philosophy about how we thought we could best help him. And I remember that night, I mean, Jim was very clear to me. He said, Mr. Secretary, he says, in my view, he said, foreign policy originates in the State Department, and the military is here to give the strength and force to that policy when we're needed. And I said to Jim that night, I said, well, you know, I appreciate that. And and the commitment I'll make to you is that every day I'm going to wake up and I'm going to ask, how can I help our men and women in uniform keep them safe and keep us from losing anyone that day? And if there's anything I can do, you call me 24/7, any time of the day or night, if I can help. And I think we both, we bonded well. I think we have a lot of shared values in the way we were raised, the way we grew up. And so there was just an immediate connection for me with Jim, and that carried over to our time in service. And I think the real linchpin to that success was the complete honesty we had with one another. I never had to wonder, was I being told, you know, truth? Was this accurate? Did I have to go find out what was going on? And I think that really allowed Jim and I to be very open with each other on what we shared in terms of our approach, very open with each other about where we had differences and where we saw problems coming up. And I think our communications, we maintained a very active lines of communication when we were both in Washington, D.C. together. And if we were traveling, we spoke very frequently to ensure that we both had the same information, at least, as we were trying to deal with the challenges that were confronting us. And I think another element of that is Jim provided me some outstanding resources from the Pentagon, from the military, as part of my policy planning team. And they just really brought the perspective that I needed into the policy planning activities over at State. So I don't know how it was in the past. I only know how it was when I was there, and it was nothing but positive and a real pleasure.
Hey, Jim.
You know, Bob Gates, former Secretary of Defense, said something to us when we were 4-stars. A bunch of us said the only way government works at the top is with trusted personal relations, and nothing could be truer. We're all, just like Abe Lincoln, we're creatures of our formative experiences. I'd experienced, David, what you explained there about disconnects between state and defense. I'd lost Marines over it. And I thought, too, that we had over-militarized our foreign policy since 1991. This is not a partisan position. Those are both Republican and Democrat administrations. And we needed State Department back in the driver's seat of our foreign policy. I told the Secretary that I'll tell you what the military can do and what it can't do. I'll give you the military factors. But we can control our bureaucracies. Being a leader, you've got to have the force of personality. The bureaucracies became collaborative, frankly. Rex and I never walked into the White House disagreeing, so they had to referee. We settled everything ahead of time in weekly breakfasts over in his office, and we would lay out our various issues and sort it out between us. Everyone knows my job was to be responsible for the military operations and that sort of thing. My real job was to keep the peace one more year, one more month, one more week, one more day, so Secretary Tillerson and his diplomats could work their magic. That was my real job. And I would never meet, when I went to a foreign country with a foreign leader, without the ambassador first meeting with the ambassador, with he or she alone, and then going over together. And I would never hold a meeting with a foreign official, even a Department of Defense, Ministry of Defense official in the Pentagon, without one of the Assistant Secretaries of State sitting at the table next to me. So they had absolute transparency to what we were doing, so that there was never an inch of daylight between the two departments while we were there. In no small part, thanks to Secretary Tillerson's trust and collaboration.
Okay. Both of you presumably admire Abraham Lincoln. What is it that you think Abraham Lincoln brought to the table as a leader? Was it his modesty, or his humility, his humor, or his wisdom, or his brilliance? What do you think it was that enabled Abraham Lincoln to get us through the Civil War? Rex?
Well, you kind of listed a lot of his, I think, notable qualities, and of course, he held the moniker Honest Abe. And I do think, though, that he was recognized as an individual of very high standards of personal integrity. And I think for any leader to be successful, it's important that that be recognized and that they hold themselves to it and maintain that. I think, clearly he was a very skillful politician. He used all the levers of his office, regardless of where he was as he was moving his way up to the presidency. But he was also a master of communication. And the thing that always has attracted me to Lincoln is the precision with which he communicated, both verbally, but as he could write. He would go through a series of drafts and actually scratch out one word and keep inserting another word until he found just the right adjective or just the right noun to convey a message and a communication that everyone would interpret the same way. And I think that's the real challenge for a president, anyone leading very large organizations, is how do you communicate to them? And how did Abraham Lincoln communicate to the entire country in a way that it resonated with everyone the same way? It motivated them, it moved them in the same way. And I think that was, for me, that was one of the great strengths that Lincoln had, was that ability to communicate in such a precise way, but also in such a way that people were moved. They were moved to his position.
Okay. In other words, if you don't think that the Gettysburg Address could be improved by making it 5 or 6 times as long, is that right?
No, and I think, and I'm sure almost everyone knows the history of how that came about. He wrote it in the carriage on the way out, and wasn't even supposed to be a featured speaker. But I think, again, the precision of those words, I don't know what you could add to it, and certainly what you would take away from it. It's one of the most powerful messages, and I've used it on historic sites. I recited parts of it at the cemetery in Normandy and participating at events, and those same words were applicable about speaking of hallowed ground and how we cannot make it any more hallowed because it's already been done by those who sacrificed that day. These are words that endure forever, and they endure in a wide array of application.
Hey, Jim, what do you think the qualities are that Lincoln had that were so unique as a leader?
Well, I think Secretary Tillerson just summed them up so well. I would only add, I wouldn't take anything away from the Secretary, what he just described, but there was a combination of competence by this man who was always learning and empathy, which gave hope to people that he really understood what they were going through. And he was there with them. In the military, we say the troops don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And he had that empathy, which allowed him to give hope and connect with people. And I think, too, he would define reality. He did not patronize people. And a leader has to define reality. And he was a man of thought and action. And then he was going to do something about the reality, even if he had to do it sadly. And he made it clear to his fellow countrymen that he did not want this war. But he did not do his best. He did what was required of him. And I think that really sets him apart. And it's why so many leaders today, not just American, study Lincoln as a role model. We all have to be ourselves. We have to stay authentic. But there's a lot you can adopt and put in your own style from Lincoln that I just don't find with others. And 2 things he didn't tolerate clearly were victimhood and cynicism. In the military, we consider those 2 qualities simply to be other forms of cowardice. But if you look at him, he is constantly removing the cynical people. They lose their arguments in the face of what he said at Gettysburg in his second inaugural, with malice toward none and charity for all. And I think that it's important in an age when we seem to take some pride in victimhood, or a cynic sounds like a world-wise person to remember. If anyone had a reason to be cynical or feel victimized by events, it would be Abraham Lincoln, and he had none of it. So just real qualities of a man who is leading in the worst of circumstance.
I don't know if you've heard this story, but he did tolerate drinking because some of his aides said that Ulysses S. Grant was drinking too much. And he said, why don't you find out what he's drinking and send it to the rest of my generals? Think that's true?
I don't know if but he did have a way of working with other people. He did not expect perfection from everyone around him. He expected results. And that, too, is the mark of a leader. And I think that what he was doing was showing he was going to reward certain behavior. And in the midst of war, that means you have to win battles. It's that simple. It's not nice. It's not becoming in many ways. But what he was saying was winning battles comes first. Get a keg of it and give it to my other generals.
So Lincoln was a person who loved theater. And as we all know, he probably went to the theater more than 100 times while he was president of the United States. It gave him an opportunity to relax from the war and so forth. So when you're leading an organization like the State Department or the Pentagon or Exxon, did you, Rex, say, well, I got to take some time off and I'm going to relax. I got to get away from the pressures. What did you do to relax?
Well, I love the outdoors, David, and anytime I could escape to the outdoors, that in whatever fashion, whether it was just to saddle up my favorite ranch pony and ride out in the outdoors for a few hours, or get a fly rod in my hand and escape to the mountains to a river in solitude. If I had the luxury of being able to take that time to do that, that was most regenerative for me. But I do love to read. I have a large library, maybe not as large as Jim's, but I have a very large library. I probably won't get to all of it during my lifetime. I've read quite a bit, but I go back and reread my favorite books, and I find that that's very relaxing. It does allow me to clear the mind a bit, and in terms of the arts, I love the theater. I'm missing it terribly during this time of pandemic, and look forward to stage productions being able to return, because that was always another way, particularly there in Washington while I was serving, to go to Ford's Theater or go to one of the other theaters and attend a play, or if there was a symphony in town. I love music, love the symphony. And all of those are just an opportunity to let the brain disengage for a little bit. Hopefully some of the stuff that's crowded in there that you didn't really need just kind of never comes back, and you got some room for some more important things. But I think every leader that's in a high pressure position really needs to gift themselves, if I could say that, that opportunity, because they will be more effective if they allow themselves to refresh a bit. And as I used to say, I need to go someplace and hit the Control-Alt-Delete button and reboot my brain, because it was I could tell when things were getting a bit overtaxed. And I think it's important that everyone find whatever that outlet is to do that.
Okay. Jim, what did you do to relax and get away from it all, if you possibly could, while you're a general?
Yeah, well, it's sometimes, like, it won't surprise you, like Rex Tillerson, I like the outdoors. That's why I was in the infantry. They actually paid me to be outdoors. Sometimes I had to live in little holes, but it was still good stuff. But I just go sit on the side of a sand dune or up on the side of a mountain, just think things over at times, that sort of thing. I think that I was talking to the former Chief of Staff of the Army, General Ray Odierno, when we were both younger generals. I said, what do you think the biggest deficiency we have in the military leaders, senior leaders? And without a moment's hesitation, he said, a lack of reflection. And I think what Secretary Tillerson just went through is critical, that any of you who are in leadership positions, you need to carve out some time. Otherwise, the sound of your own gears can drive you crazy, and you start missing things. You become mechanistic. You're treating people snappishly. I actually kept someone around who just because, frankly, he didn't give a damn what I thought about him. And he kind of tried to keep me posted when I was starting to lose the human touch there. And it is through reflection, through going to the theater, through reading a book that has nothing to do with what your job is, or just go sit on the side of a sand dune and just think. George Shultz, when he was Secretary of State, told me that an hour or two each week, he'd tell his secretary, I'm going to close the door unless it's my wife or the president. Don't interrupt me for an hour. And he didn't use it to write letters or catch up on things. He just sat there with a blank pad of paper and thought about, what am I missing? It's really important you hear what Secretary Tillerson just said and you stay human, because these jobs can really, they can warp you if you don't fight for yourself.
Hey, Rex, when you're the CEO of a large company like Exxon or you're Secretary of State, you're supposed to be a tough leader and you're commanding, many, many hundreds of thousands of people. And is it possible to show empathy without seeming to be weak? Lincoln used to show empathy, but people didn't think he was weak. But is it difficult to do that because you're supposed to be as strong as possible as a leader? But if you show empathy or sympathy with people, does that make you look weaker? And how did you deal with those issues?
Well, no, David, I think it's essential that people see your humanity, that you're a human being, and that you do have a side of you that can connect with what others are dealing with, their struggles, how they're suffering. And it's important that when you have to make some of your most difficult decisions, where this is going to have impact on people's lives, it's going to have impact on their future in ways that may not be positive, that you at least recognize that. And even though that is going to be an outcome, it is a decision that has to be made, and you can't back away from it. And I think in those instances, that's when it's important that people see that side of you, that you do recognize it first, that you can connect with the consequences of what you're about to have to do, and that you struggle with it as a human being. And so I think in many respects that is what Lincoln was able to do, and that's why it was never seen as a weakness. And quite frankly, I have never seen that as a weakness in other leaders, leaders that I reported to, as I was developing and coming up through the organization, and other leaders I've seen who have had to make those difficult decisions. When I saw that side of them and their humanity, it only garnered a greater deal of respect from me, because it said they're keenly aware of the consequences of what they are about to do.
Okay. Jim, what about that empathy? You're a 4-star Marine general in combat. How do you show empathy but also show strength at the same time?
Well, the Marines breed their own level of toughness. So the first thing is you don't got to go around throwing your weight around or acting tough. I mean, just be yourself and focus on the job. But I never saw empathy as detrimental. Even the youngest 18-year-old sailors, soldiers, Marines, airmen, they know they're not a life insurance corporation. But they just need to know you care about them, because you're going to sign the orders that sends them forward. And you have to balance the idealism that you feel with a pragmatism, because the mission comes first, and everybody understands that. Even at the peril of their lives. That's what young people do when they sign up to defend the country. What they're saying is they're going to sign a blank check payable to every one of us, payable with their life to defend that Constitution. And I think you do have to know yourself. Part of this is, for example, I don't take casualties well. I just don't take them well. So I'd tell my subordinate commanders, you notify me if you can't keep fighting, but as you take casualties, do not report them to me. You medevac the wounded, you do what you can for them and keep the rest of your men alive and keep attacking, but we'll grieve together when it's over. But make sure you don't put an impossible burden on yourself with the empathy that you feel for the lads. You've simply got to do what you've got to do once this country makes the grave decision to go to war. So I would say that the limit on empathy is your own ability to carry your humanity into a very primitive, very atavistic circumstance and come out the other side. As I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. said after the Civil War, combat makes good men better and bad men worse. Try to come out on the good men better side of that equation.
Jim, let me ask you a question. Abraham Lincoln, in the Gettysburg Address, talked about the last full devotion that the soldiers had given, which is to say they gave their lives. When you are a soldier, you run the risk of your life being taken away in combat. Why is it that young men and women are prepared to die for a country? People don't die for their city necessarily. They don't die for their school. They don't die for their neighborhood. What is it about their country and this country that makes young men and women say, I'm prepared to pay the last full measure of devotion for this country?
You know, a World War II Marine said that the country didn't have to be perfect to be worth fighting for. As long as it's trying to get better, it's always, remember, we're building a country here. It's not built. It's never built. We're building. It's hard work, but it's noble work. And I usually learn the answer to the question you just asked, David, from our enemies, from our adversaries. They have taught me a lot. I'll give you an example. You can see a picture back here, 29 sailors and Marines who, when I was a 2-star, drove me all around Western Iraq. And during 4 months, 17 of those 29 were killed or wounded around me. And I'm a general. I'm not even in the tough fighting. We're outnumbered. The enemy is trying to get foreign fighters in from Syria to kill people in Baghdad. And I pull into an outpost in the middle of nowhere out in the Western Euphrates River Valley, and a lieutenant with 40 sailors and Marines at midnight welcomes me inside his perimeter. And in the morning, he said, we caught a guy trying to lay an IED on the road you were coming in on. Well, that's kind of personal. He said, well, he lived in 2 years in London. He's an engineer, Rex, someone you might know. And he said, you want to talk to him? I said, sure. So he came over. The guard brought him over. They'd caught him the night before laying the IED. Looked up, and there's 5 Marines in camouflage uniforms pointing rifles. He knows his 401k is in trouble. And I said, what are you doing this for? I could tell he was Sunni. I said, we're the Marines. We're the only friends you got here. He said, oh, you Jews, you Americans, you're here to steal the oil. I said, no, we're not. In fact, I pull my wallet out every time I pump gas in my car. But you're an educated man. Let's just end this now if you're going to talk like that. And the Marine stepped forward to take him away. He said, can I sit here a minute? I said, sure. He sat there in the dirt with me. And then he says, I don't like having foreign soldiers in my country. Well, I can respect that. But I want you to hear the rest of this story. As I'm getting ready to leave, I've talked to him about his family. Wife and 2 daughters live down on a river about 10 kilometers away, forced out of Baghdad by the Civil War. And he says, General, am I going to jail? I said, oh, yeah, you're going to be wearing an orange jumpsuit in Abu Ghraib prison for a good many years for this little stunt. You're lucky you're not dead. And he says, do you think, General, if I'm a model prisoner, my family and I can immigrate to America someday? Now stop and think about that. That on our worst day in America, and we look at our country and we're so dissatisfied with it, on our worst day, that guy right now would love to be sitting where we're sitting and his daughters in our schools. Sometimes you find out the answer to why these young people are willing to do this through the eyes of an enemy. The power of America's inspiration is so great that here at home, where we rightly focus on where we fall short, we lose sight of just how fortunate we are. We lose sight of that motivation that runs so pure in our young 18, 20-year-old patriots, young women and men who sign up and put their lives on the line. They do it because we're just that much of an inspiration, David.
Okay. Rex, you rose up to be the head of Exxon and Secretary of State. Did you have mentors that helped you? And did you have role models that you wanted to follow? How important in leadership do you think it is to have a mentor or a role model?
Well, I don't think any of us could move up without having the help of others who are more senior than we are. And so I had, I was fortunate to have a number of mentors along the way. And And I had a number of role models, both good role models and not so good role models. I reflect back on people that I worked for, who I looked up to for leadership. Some of them were outstanding, and I learned a lot about leadership from them. And some of them were deeply flawed, and I learned a lot about how I didn't want to be, in particular characteristics that they displayed. So I think as you're developing it as an individual, to any young person that's listening or thinking about this, I think the important element of it is that you understand who you are, and you never lose sight of who you are. And then as you're being mentored or as you're looking at other role models for attributes that you think are useful and that you could learn how to adapt in your leadership toolkit, you also know what you don't want to be. Because I think the key to the ultimate success of any leader, and I think the word was used earlier about being authentic, you can't fake it. You can't fake being something you're not. And so I think the value of the mentors and role models are really identifying those elements that you think can be part of your growth and development as a leader while maintaining your identity as who you are. And remember that you don't want to lose yourself as you're advancing and moving up in any role that you undertake. And so I think it's the other element of that as I talk about role models, that you learn some good things from them and you learn some bad things, is that one of the things I learned early on about really effective leaders is they never make things about them. It's never about them. It's about the mission. It's about the objective. It's about the ultimate success of the team they're leading. And those leaders who were not so effective, it seemed to always be about them. And I think it's important to be keenly aware of and paying attention as your journey on growing continues, and it never ends. I mean, I was learning things and still learn things about myself as a leader, and you're never done, because the world around you is not standing still, and the people you're leading are ever changing in terms of their makeup. So it's important to always recognize you're not a finished product, you're a work in progress.
We have time for one more question for each of you. So let me ask you both the same question. In fact, Jim, if you could tell us, you've served your country for an enormous number of years, many decades, and you risked your life for the country. What are you doing now that keeps you busy, keeps you active? And if some future president said, come on back, I want you to serve again, what would you say?
Well, on the second question, I would encourage and coach some young people to step forward to go in. Obviously, there is an obligation, and we serve and we put others first. But no, I think that overall, what we see in this country is a refreshing of the leadership that we need right now, frankly. And I just don't concern myself much with those kinds of things, David, other than I do a lot of teaching, obviously, right now at colleges, do a lot of lecturing, guest lecturing at various schools across the country, even high schools. And it's very rewarding to do that as we try to bring, you get the color hair that we share, and what you want to do is kind of run the elevator down, open the doors up, bring the young people on, take them up a couple floors, tell them some stories along the way, open the door and say, now go out and make your own mistakes. Don't make the same ones I made. So keep them rolling.
Jim, when you go to, let's say, McDonald's or something like that, do you stand in line like everybody else? You say, I'm a 4-star general and you know what I did for the country? Or do you not tell people what you did and who you are?
Oh yeah, I tell McDonald's who I am, and I can get coffee for $2.50 when I tell them that. It's really great.
So Rex, what are you doing to right now with your time? And when you run out of gas, do you go to an Exxon and you pump the gas yourself? And by the way, I've always wanted to know, is that Exxon gas any different than Shell gas or any other gas? Are they all the same?
No, absolutely. Exxon gas is far superior with their additive packages. And yes, I pump my own gas, and I have my rewards card, so I get my cash back. But what I've been doing since I got home from Washington is serving on some nonprofit boards about in areas that are of great interest to me. The speaking that I'm doing publicly is by and large on behalf of nonprofits to help them in their mission. But the theme that I've been hammering throughout all of my speeches and public speaking that I've been doing is, and particularly with young people, is the importance of your personal integrity, and that it is the most valuable aspect of your life. You're born with your integrity intact. No one can take it away from you. Only you can yield it or compromise it in your actions and the way you conduct yourself. And that once it's lost, it's very difficult to regain it. And so I try to make sure young people understand you don't have to compromise yourself, because there are so many poor examples out there today, regrettably, of people who are less than ethical in their conduct, who don't maintain the highest standard of integrity. And it'd be very easy for a young person to conclude that, well, everybody does that and it's okay, and let's just we're just not going to follow those rules. And I hope to impress upon them that you don't have to do that to be successful, and that in fact others will admire you when you maintain your honesty and your personal integrity intact. And so it's the theme I've been on broadly, is to try to drive that point home to others. It is the basis upon which we can work together cooperatively and successfully, is knowing that the people I'm dealing with, and they know they're dealing with someone who is going to be honest and straightforward and maintain a high standard of integrity in all of our dealings. And it's a quality that I found was valued all over the world, in all cultures around the world.
Gentlemen, we are out of time. I want to thank you both, General Mattis and Secretary Tillerson, for a very interesting conversation. I wish Abe Lincoln was here to hear it, but no doubt he's listening in and probably was very appreciative of what you've had to say about him and about leadership. So now let me turn it back to Paul. Paul?
David, thank you so much. General Mattis, Secretary Tillerson, let me just say, first of all, you are all extraordinary students of Abraham Lincoln, and you can come back and lecture or guest speak anytime at Ford's Theater. So thank you so much. David, you run a brilliant conversation, and what a wonderful afternoon. I thank you all very much. I want to thank you for helping us today in this conversation. And most importantly, I want to thank all three of you for your service to the country and all that you do to make this country so extraordinary. Thank you both, all of you, very much. I want to thank also all who are watching today. We will continue to respond to your Facebook and Twitter comments and questions that we didn't get to during the live session today. If you enjoyed today's cabinet conversation, consider making a gift to help support the mission and work of Ford's Theater. You can do so at fords.org/donate. Please join us for our next cabinet conversation on March 18th. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you all very much. Have a great afternoon.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay. All right, now we're going to do